So WandaVision has been released and we get 2 episodes as a start, and the first thing I noticed about the show is that the attention to detail that they made to make this look like a 50s sitcom is amazing. The set design, the cheap special effects, the basic cinematography, the costumes, the music, and even the performances from the actors is extremely authentic to the acting of those times. And when the show started to glitch and slowly fall apart, that's what I was most interested in, as tiny and short-lived as they were. And when Wanda says, "Vision, help him," she seemed very antagonistic, which is interesting because it feels like even she broke out of her overly happy 50s sitcom attitude and became aggressive. Although I gotta say that this scene was so much creepier in the trailer and it felt very toned down in the actual episode. And I like how at the end of episode 2 we get a hint that this person is evil and then Wanda says no. It gives me the impression that this person is really a good guy and Wanda doesn't want to deal with the reality that Vision is dead. At least that's what my guess is thus far. We will have to see in the end. And seeing the aspect ratio change is a lot of fun, especially if you're watching these episodes on a projector like I am. And I'm gonna be honest here, as far as the first 2 episodes go, those are all the good things I have to say about it. Now it's time to move on to the things I didn't like about this show. First off, I like the 50s sitcom element and the way it was presented, but I didn't like the way it was written. More to the point, I didn't like any of the jokes. Both me and my younger brother didn't laugh at any of the jokes, except for one. The misconception on the phone with Vision and Wanda was a classic joke that comedies usually do very well, but the one good joke that WandaVision had, unfortunately just ended way too quickly. If the writers are smart enough, then these kinds of jokes can go on for quite a while, but they stopped it very quickly, and that unfortunately says a lot about the overall confidence and skill that this writer has with comedy. But then there were other jokes that were either silly or just didn't work. How could she confuse this guy for Vision? This joke was so stupid. Now the first 2 episodes play out like a 50s comedy sitcom, but that being said, it plays out like a bad 50s comedy sitcom. It's like Marvel took one of their worst qualities, comedy, and designed a show around it. And as we nearly finished watching the first episode, I felt like I was getting a bit of a headache. After the episode was over, I told my brother about it and he said he felt the same way. Now I like when the setting is starting to fall apart and a bit of reality hits the characters, and that's obviously the most interesting part of the show, but having to sit through 40 minutes of a 50s sitcom storyline to get those small moments, it doesn't feel worth it. My younger brother said something after we watched the 2 episodes that really stuck with me. He said that if anyone else did this concept other than Marvel, it would have been much better. And that is true, because yes, they are using an old concept, but say if you got the Deadpool writers to write Deadpool in a 50s sitcom show, you can immediately imagine the hilarious possibilities with that. And I feel like those writers would write better humor that falls within the old 50s comedy style while still being funny. But the humor in WandaVision is just impactless. And if the whole point is that 50s sitcoms are not supposed to be funny, then they shouldn't have made 2 full episodes around it. I actually said after watching the first episode that I don't think I can take another one of these, and I was looking at episode 2 whilst I said this. And then regardless, I put episode 2 on, and ultimately, my concerns with this concept that I expressed in my trailer reviews of WandaVision were absolutely validated for me after I watched episode 2. They can be funny, but they just aren't, and humor is Marvel's weak point that they don't seem to be improving on. And I think that is ultimately going to be the failing point of this show, and it's a shame because so far, that seems to be the main sell of these early episodes, that they're comedies. And if they want to make these episodes comedic, then that's fine, but they should have included humor that was actually funny, and I don't see myself rewatching these episodes ever again. Say whatever you will, defend it however you will, I should at least be entertained, and I wasn't. I was just bored. These episodes feel like they are so padded out and they didn't provide me with enough of a hook. The actors are doing great and they are acting like they are fully from this time period, but there is no comedic timing and the comedic writing is just poor. Now like I said, I love when we see hints of the world falling apart and Wanda realizing that stuff isn't real in these episodes, but everything around it, I'm just really bored by it. And that is unlike me because I grew up loving storylines where our characters are in make-believe worlds. I grew up with make-believe world episodes in Batman the Animated Series, Ben 10, Teen Titans, Young Justice, Spider-Man the Animated Series, and many more. I think even Justice League had a couple of make-believe episodes, one being an absolute tearjerker. Even Sherlock did it with The Abominable Bride, and that took on a Victorian horror approach with its time period. It was also, on its own merits, a really fun and creative make-believe episode. Whether the make-believe world is in the past, the present, or even the future, it's a concept that is a lot of fun, and it's always intriguing. But WandaVision is the first property that takes the concept of the make-believe world world, and I wasn't immediately bought into it. I was actually pretty bored by it. It needed to give us more to go on, but when I reflect on the 2 episodes that I just saw, I feel like we just watched a big pile of nothing. Unlike the rest of the shows with these make-believe worlds, I'm only continuing to watch WandaVision because this is an MCU show. If this was a new show that came out, then I would have stopped watching it after episode 1. That's how lackluster the quality of the writing is. So far, it does not stand on its own as a good show, and in general, the only reason that people are watching this is because it's Marvel. If this wasn't a show that was connected to the MCU, then people would not be watching it. And a show or movie should be able to stand on its own, and as of right now, this one can't. It's time for the scores. My score for the first episode of WandaVision is a 4 out of 10, and the second episode gets a 5. I am never going to be revisiting these episodes, and honestly, the commitment and production value of the 50s sitcom aesthetic is the only reason that it got all those points from me to begin with. Marvel are constantly criticized for not doing anything different, and although they are trying here, I think they are failing due to the fact that they are really stretching out the use of this concept. 2 episodes in 50s sitcom land is way too long, and despite watching 2 episodes, it has failed to catch my attention. So here's hoping that episode 3 will give us something more that we can sink our teeth into, because right now, I feel like I've just wasted my time. Whatever little these 2 episodes have established, they could have easily done it in 1 episode max. They didn't need to do it in 2. And I feel like releasing just 2 episodes was a mistake. It would be better if they could just release all the episodes in just 1 day and let us binge watch them at our own leisure. But no, they want to keep you paying and subscribe to Disney Plus, so they aren't going to do that. And I feel like that is just damaging for a show like this. They should have at least given us 3 episodes to start out with, or maybe release 2 episodes a week. But unfortunately, we are still stuck with the same ancient TV release schedule. Even though with streaming services, I thought we had moved forward with TV, but no, we are still living in the past. Again, I applaud Marvel for trying to do something that is kind of different, seeing as most of everything else they do is the same, but seeing as we have come out of the black and white phase of the show, I feel like that is one error that they didn't make the best use of. Now I like how this episode is called In Color, as when color television was new, programs would often highlight that they were in color, as that was the new hot selling point at the time. And again, the production value of this episode is very well done. The cheap effects and the 60s production is very well executed to give off the look of a 60s sitcom. And as for the humor this time round, well, there was one scene with Vision, and at first I smiled because I thought they were going to build up to a funny joke, but then he says this.
I can't wait to be a proud papaya.
You know, it's funny, and I mean that as a figure of speech, that they are trying to say that this is 60s sitcom humor when really, they have already done this kind of joke before.
Interesting.
Guess what I call them? Sneakers. Because you... Never mind.
So I'm not really seeing 60s sitcom humor, I'm just seeing regular old dated MCU humor that is mostly not funny and just comes off as staged. Well, depending which of their movies you watch. I only smiled at 2 jokes, and it's when the 2 are choosing baby names and Wanda says Tommy and then Vision says, or Billy. That made me smile. Oh, and the joke where this wife asks her husband if these earrings make her look fat, and then the lights go out and the husband's response made me smile too. Although my younger brother was not as impressed as I was with those 2 jokes. He didn't smile even once. Anyway, Wanda is pregnant with twins, and there are a bunch of shenanigans that go on, and yeah, let's cut the bullshit. After Wanda has the twins, she says to Monica Rambeau that she was a twin, and she brings up Quicksilver. Monica Rambeau says that she remembers what happened to him, that Ultron killed him. This makes Wanda get all mad, and she realizes that Monica Rambeau is not part of this world that she has created. And meanwhile, whilst all this is going on, we see Vision speaking to the neighbors who are very suspicious of Monica Rambeau. And they almost let slip that this is a world that Wanda has created, and Vision is slowly starting to piece this together himself too. We find out that Wanda throws Monica Rambeau out of her world, and after a bunch of soldiers show up, we see that there seems to be this force field here which pretty much illustrates that Wanda has locked herself out from the rest of the world, as well as the people that she has in there with her. So I gotta say, this is the first good episode of WandaVision I've seen, only because we get less bullshit and the ending really made an impression, unlike the first 2 black and white episodes which I honestly thought were just embarrassing. And they did not invest me into the show, rather they just pissed me off instead. This 60s sitcom world did exactly what I wanted the black and white world to do. It only used 1 episode and then gave us a reveal, and it spent less time meandering. And honestly, it feels quite insulting that they decided to give reviewers the first 3 episodes as the first impression, and the rest of us common folk, they just gave the first 2 episodes as the first impression. And a very, very bad first impression that was. They should have given us the 3 episodes, and if they did, I would have been much more optimistic with the show during its debut. So episode 3 gets a 6 out of 10. This episode opens with Monica Rambeau as she's being resurrected from Thanos' snap, and I loved this scene. Unlike the shit visualization of the blip in Spider-Man Far From Home, where they turned everyone coming back into a stupid joke, in this episode, it's almost horrifying watching everyone come back. And we see how even the hospital staff are confused, and this scene is not treated like a joke, and it massively benefits from it. Monica Rambeau also finds out that her mum has died, and yeah, I don't care. I didn't like that character in Captain Marvel, and I am not going to lose sleep over her death here. We also see two other returning characters. We see Wu, who amusingly has finally gotten that card trick down from Ant-Man 2, and we have Kat Dennings from Thor. I really didn't like her character when they were forcing her to be the comic relief in Thor: The Dark World, and although I don't want to see her again, they did subdue her here, so I was able to tolerate her at least. So long as they keep her pulled back with her humour, then I have no problems with her. Again, the main problems I have with these characters is the crappy MCU humour. Even Wu is pulled back with his comic relief, which I really do appreciate. It makes him a much more likeable character. At first I thought he was just a bad actor with Ant-Man 2, but after I saw him in Aquaman, I actually realised no, he's not a bad actor, he's actually a very good and charming actor. It's just the overly jokey dialogue that they gave him in Ant-Man 2, which just didn't know when to stop, that was really holding him back as an actor. But after seeing him in Aquaman and now seeing him pull back here, I really do like his character and the presence that he gives as an actor. Although Kat Dennings did have a stupid and dated joke though about no one getting her coffee for her, and that is the dumb MCU humour showing its face again, but there is a lot less of it here, which I appreciate. So very quickly you find out that this whole episode is showing you what happened outside of the world that Wanda created, and all the little hints of Wanda's world falling apart in the previous episodes all make sense now. The toy helicopter, the voice from the radio, it all makes sense, and we see how the characters from the outside are trying to get in contact with her, as she seems to have taken control of this whole little area from this town. And Monica Rambeau by the end of the episode finds out what we all assumed right from the beginning, that Wanda is the one creating this world, and no one is keeping her captive. So unfortunately, that wasn't much of a shock to the rest of us, as even in the previous episodes that I reviewed, and even when I reviewed the trailer for WandaVision, the internet's first guess was that it was Wanda creating this world. So you guys were all right about that, and I was right with my assumption that I thought this guy was a good guy that came in and Wanda didn't want him to come in, hence she said no and rewinded the world. So yeah, she's kind of the villain here, which is cool. And when Vision enters the room and she sees his dead body from Infinity War, I really like the way they did that. The MCU is usually too soft when it comes to showing certain things, but I liked how they showed Vision here almost like a dead zombie walking. And when she confesses to Vision that there is no other way for them to be together, this pretty much shows that she is aware that she is in a fake world and she wants to stay in it. I gotta say, when they were not telling dumb jokes in this episode, I actually enjoyed it the most, because it felt like they weren't taking away from the seriousness of the scenes with some ill-timed humor, and the episode has benefited greatly from it. How greatly? Well, this episode is going to get my highest rating I've given these episodes so far. It gets an 8 out of 10. So the show is getting better, and I hope that we don't have to sit through any more shitty sitcoms. I want Wanda's world to really start falling apart, and I want the rest of the season to really start moving forward, not back. We know the situation now, and I don't want any more meandering. One thing they didn't tell us though is what happened to the beekeeper. Wanda said no, and she rewinded everything. Does that mean he went back as well, or is he stuck somewhere? They didn't tell us, so hopefully that's something they will address later. Now I'm going to skip through all of the sitcom stuff in this episode, although I will say that the whole sitcom thing was done the best here. Not because the jokes were funny, I still thought they were kind of lame, but they weren't cringe-worthy, so that made them less irritating to me, and they went by without being a nuisance. And I like how the episode switched back and forth from the sitcom to everyone else. That significantly improved the pacing of the episode, as well as making it more interesting to sit through. And in one of these scenes, we find out that Wanda breaks into a facility and takes Vision's body and resurrects him. And they also say something that I didn't understand. They say that she is going against Vision's wishes by bringing him back to life, and it honestly feels like they pulled this bit of information out of their butts, because I never heard Vision say anything like that, and for them to just throw it in feels lazy. You guys tell me, did Vision ever say that to her and I just can't remember? I found that really bizarre. There was also a scene where these three talk about Avengers Endgame, and Monica Rambeau mentions how Wanda would have killed Thanos if he didn't rain fire, and they said no one else came close, and then Wu says Captain Marvel came close, and I'm just thinking, how do they know this? The final battle took place in the absolutely destroyed remains of the Avengers facility. Any cameras that were there would have been completely obliterated, so that was very weird. These characters aren't supposed to know this, and we get this awesome scene where Wanda breaks character and comes out of the world that she created and speaks to everyone. She puts her Russian accent back on, and there has been a lot of confusion with regards to her accents in these films. How she puts it on and then puts it off, and the cast and even the Russo brothers have tried to explain it, and none of it holds any water, and I'm still confused. I don't understand how they are trying to execute the multiverse, and yet the most confusing thing is Wanda's accent. Regardless, this scene was really cool, and her Russian accent makes her sound a bit more unsettling. And when you hear Wanda speak, she comes across as a completely different person. It's like she's completely crazy. And throughout this episode, Vision starts to realize that this world isn't right, and after a conversation with one of his co-workers, and the realization of how much pain he's in with Wanda's mind control, it really shows how evil this whole thing is that she's doing. And Vision sympathizing for them and realizing that this world isn't real, it actually makes him a much better character, and a far more fleshed out character than he ever was before. And I definitely think that this episode in particular has made Vision a much stronger character, far better than he was in any of the previous movies. And I like how he yells at Wanda and says that the people she's controlling are in pain, although I do find it strange that she doesn't just rewind the sitcom like she did in one of the earlier episodes when Vision started to realize that things were off. Regardless, during a very heated argument between Wanda and Vision, there's a convenient knock at the door, and Vision thinks that Wanda is doing it just to distract from their argument, even though she seems to genuinely say that this is not her. The doorbell rings again and Wanda opens the door, and the person who opens it is Quicksilver from the Fox X-Men movies.
She recast Pietro?
Very funny showrunners, but she didn't recast Quicksilver, Kevin Feige did, because the Quicksilver in Age of Ultron was nothing special and didn't evoke much of a reaction from audiences anywhere near as big compared to the one that Fox did in the amazing X-Men Days of Future Past. And this clearly shows that Kevin Feige knows that Fox did a much better job with their version of Quicksilver, otherwise he wouldn't have brought him in. And by the way, I wasn't the least bit surprised when he showed up, because months ago there were articles and videos saying that Evan Peters is on the set of WandaVision, and when I heard this, there was no doubt in my mind that they were bringing him on to play Quicksilver. So I was kind of annoyed about that. I wish that was a surprise that I didn't know about. I actually did laugh though when he said,
"Who's a popsicle?"
His joke delivery just feels so much better and natural than the rest of the MCU actors who deliver jokes. Clearly all that time he was directed at Fox has taught him well, and he was really funny in X-Men. Pretty much every time he was on screen, I always had a big smile on my face.
Break into a highly secured facility and get someone out.
Prison break? That's illegal, you know.
Well, only if you get caught.
I just hope that they don't take his excellent comedic timing and dialogue and just downgrade it with immature and childish MCU humor. That will really piss me off. Also, this does raise the question, what other already established X-Men will Kevin Feige bring into the MCU? The rumors are that he talked to Hugh Jackman to come back as Wolverine, but his character had the perfect emotional ending in Logan, so I don't want him to get resurrected in the typical MCU fashion, as they can't do any better with Wolverine than what Fox has done with him, especially with his character arc in Days of Future Past and Logan. And Patrick Stewart says that him and Kevin Feige had a conversation about coming back as Charles Xavier, but because of Logan and how much he loved the work they did with that, he did not want to return. So clearly, Kevin Feige is trying to bring in the other X-Men, but I really hope they don't MCU them. Some of the movies were below par, but the characters were amazing as they were, and MCUing them will really bring these characters down and not make them feel like themselves. The MCU style of comedy is much different to Fox's style of comedy, and of the two styles of comedy, I think that Fox's was so much better. The jokes were smart and subtle and were used to tell you something about the characters, and they also were genuinely funny. They didn't stop the whole movie just to tell you these jokes either. They were very appropriately placed in the scenes, and they did not take away from the drama or the seriousness of the moment. And I don't want the MCU's comedy to compromise the quality of these characters. That's my biggest fear. The MCU style and the Fox style, they are very different and don't mix. So hopefully they give their Fox characters their Fox style of execution. Although I do wonder, is this the same Quicksilver from the Fox X-Men movies, or is it the same actor but a different Quicksilver? We'll have to wait and see. But when they eventually use his powers, I hope they use them more creatively like the Fox movies did, as opposed to just using blurry lines like they did in Avengers Age of Ultron. That was so unimpressive. This, on the other hand, was so much more awesome and memorable. So this was a very good episode, but I don't know. I was going to give it an 8 out of 10 at first, but as the day went by and I thought about it some more and let the episode sink in, I felt that the reveals didn't have as much of a big impact on me for some reason. It's a strange feeling, but I feel like I kind of forgot about the episode very quickly, which is strange, so I don't know. I really feel like the episode needed to give me something more. So this episode doesn't get the 8 out of 10 that I initially was going to give it. Instead, it gets a 7. Very good episode, but I feel like it's much more of a setup for for things to come. So we'll see what I think of the next episode. Maybe that one will have more payoff. And I hope to God that they don't screw up Quicksilver. That is my biggest concern right now, and it's filling me with this feeling of dread. I really hope they don't mess up his character. And if Hugh Jackman does come back, I don't want to imagine what a more goofy MCU version of his Wolverine will be like. I am really dreading that too. Episode 6 of WandaVision. So after we get Evan Peters as Quicksilver in the previous episode, we pretty much open with him and he stole the show. Every scene he was in, he was filling it with so much personality, and even the MCU jokes that on paper aren't even that funny, he makes them funny with his delivery and comedic timing. There is even subtlety in his comedic performance that I know was not in the script or given to him by the director. Vision gives him a fist bump to the chest and Quicksilver looks at his fist like, what just happened? That was a nice little comedic attention to detail and a very subtle bit of humor, and that's how I know that it was not written or directed by the MCU, because it was subtle. If it was the MCU, they would have drawn so much attention to it, but a little subtle bit of humor like that is enough. So Evan Peters did an amazing job in this episode, and he really did steal the show. Next up, I didn't like the kids. The two kids feel forced as all heck, and the tone of the show just feels cheaper with them. I know they're in the comics, but still, that doesn't change my outlook on them as of now. The only time I had fun watching them is when Uncle Quicksilver was with them. His mischievous interactions with them was great, and again, incredibly well acted. Although they unfortunately give him the Age of Ultron Quicksilver effect when he runs, and it's just some cheap blue lines. Not the much better running effect that he had in Days of Future Past. He's not even as fast as he was in Days of Future Past, and that's because this is not Fox as Quicksilver. And although Evan Peters as Quicksilver is the best part in this episode, he is completely pointless. Because this Quicksilver is literally the Quicksilver from Age of Ultron. It's not the multiverse starting to take effect like most of us thought, and that's why Evan Peters being in this show is completely pointless. Much like a lot of other elements in this show, he is 100% fan service, and if anything, it would make more sense emotionally as well as with the MCU's continuity if they just got their Quicksilver actor back, as opposed to going over to Fox's side. And I did find this reference to Kick-Ass super forced and out of nowhere.
Kick-Ass.
Both Evan Peters and Aaron Taylor Johnson were in the movie Kick-Ass, and it feels like they said it just to say it. And I like the upfront conversation between Quicksilver and Wanda, where he essentially says to her, "You know that I am your brother, you can talk to me." And he asks her questions about this world, and she opens up a little. And although we see that she clearly has a lot of control over this world, she doesn't know how it started in the first place. So I liked this scene between the two, although I did find it very harsh when she threw him across the room. I mean, I know he said something that was kind of mean, but this as a response was uncalled for. Just rewind back time if you don't want your kids to hear that, like you always have. Don't pull an Arya Stark and start forgetting that you've had this ability. And something I have not been talking about in this show is the commercials, and some of you guys have been asking me what I think of the commercials in this show, and honestly, I'm just not interested enough to dissect them. I'm sure they have hidden meanings to them, but I just don't feel fascinated or motivated enough to figure out what they're hinting at. I would rather wait for the future episodes to tell me. That is, until I saw the commercial in this episode, and it was awesome. The commercial made me laugh, and the production felt like a commercial that I would see in between shows on Cartoon Network when I was a kid in the early to mid 2000s. Only this one had a very dark ending, and my interpretation of this commercial is that Wanda is the shark, and this kid represents the people that she has trapped with her powers, like this lady who is in a constant loop. And likewise, this kid is constantly in this loop trying to open this lid, but he can't, yet he keeps trying again and again and repeating his cycle of movement until he eventually dies. And I'm guessing that the same thing is happening to the people that are in this world. So that was a lot more fun to dissect, and I had fun with that one. And I was on the edge of my seat when Vision was trying to escape the world that Wanda had created and see what was on the other side. I didn't know what was going to happen. Was he going to revert back to the state when Thanos killed him or something? Is he only alive because he's in Wanda's world? I don't know, but it clearly appears that he cannot escape the world as it keeps pulling him back. And when Wanda finds out about this through one of her kids, she crazily expands this world that she has created, and the entire crew of S.W.O.R.D. outside get pulled into this world, with only Director Douchebag here and one or two others being the only survivors. And also, Darcy is handcuffed to a car by S.W.O.R.D., and instead of saying, "Are you serious right now?" she should be screaming for her life and begging for help, because she should be terrified of being one of Wanda's prisoners in her world. But instead, she completely underplays it and says, "Are you serious right now?" Also, are you kidding me right now? Is this a CGI tear? Because tears don't look that big and fake. Also, I like the idea of seeing stuff like this, it makes for some creepy imagery, but the music is not the slightest bit creepy. If it was, then this could be more freaky and unnerving, but instead, it feels like this scene is unfinished and the composer forgot to compose music for it. I would even say the same goes for the music when Vision talks to Agnes in her car and she asks him if he's an Avenger and he says, "What's an Avenger?" The music is not reacting to what's going on, and these are meant to be creepy scenes as well as big moments for Vision to get motivated to confront Wanda and help these people, but they lack impact. Not because of the actors or the directing, but because of the music. The music that's playing here is the same goofy music that's playing during the Halloween party, and when it cuts to these scenes, it should be more serious and intense, as these are the show's more serious moments, and the music should reflect that, but it doesn't. Also, as expected, this scene where Agnes laughs was nowhere near as creepy as the trailer made it out to be. But again, I really like seeing the sympathetic side to Vision, such as when he promises Agnes that he will stop Wanda. It really makes me root for him, and I am 100% on his side here. So the previous episode 5 was a build-up episode, and I thought this episode would have more of a payoff to it, but it's ultimately another build-up episode. And because of that, my score for this episode is also a 7 out of 10. It's fun, but it's lacking atmosphere and substance, and although I had fun with this episode, it didn't do much plot-wise to earn a higher rating. Next up is episode 7, and I gotta say, I am freaking done with these sitcom openings. The episodes always feel like they are at a complete standstill just so they can use this comedy sitcom gimmick, and I'm just waiting for them to be over so we can get to the actual substance and story of the episode. It's obvious that they're trying to make this look like a reality TV or mockumentary, and I don't care. The whole sitcom thing is just completely lost on me now, and it's really overstayed its welcome. Now on the plus side, we cut back to Vision, and again, I really love the way the aspect ratio changes. Again, I'm watching this on my projector, and it's a lot of fun to see the screen just grow right in front of you. And I like how he's lying on the ground on top of green grass, the same way he was when he died in Infinity War. Vision follows a deluded Darcy around who doesn't know who he is, but I like that Vision snaps her out of her trance very quickly. I completely forgot that he could do that, and he did it very quickly without the episode padding itself out. In this scene at least. And throughout the episode, Wanda is seeing her world completely glitch out. This is the kind of thing I would have loved, but the episode completely ruins it, because it's not horrifying. Wanda is clearly concerned and worried about all of this, but again, the music does not match her concern. It's just playing more goofy music, and that's not making this scene unnerving and creepy, it's just making it feel silly and goofy. And what's annoying is that the jig should be up at this point. We should start to see the dismantling of the sitcom world as we near the last 2 episodes, but they still keep dragging the sitcom thing on. This just proves my point that when Marvel are doing something that is suspenseful or serious, they get nervous and think, let's pull back into our safe space, comedy. No, this is too serious and scary for you. Don't worry, here are some jokes instead. If they made the music creepy and showed that even Wanda is starting to lose her cool and start freaking out, and then she talks in an interview about her life and how scary things have gotten, then that would be a great and really effective way of incorporating the sitcom element into the actual story. But they're just doing what I always feared they would do. The trailer was making it look creepy, but in typical MCU fashion, they were false advertising. The tone of this show is constantly being pulled back into comedy, even though it should be creepy. It's like this show commits to the comedy, but it does not commit to any of the horror elements that it was teasing in the trailer. The scariest thing in this whole entire show is in the black and white episode where the boss and his wife were glitching, and even that was watered down with its creep factor when compared to how it was beautifully advertised in the trailer.
Watch out!
What does he mean, watch out? It was nowhere near them.
No.
I can get through.
I would have at least kept my helmet on before going in, and I found it odd how Monica Rambeau uses some newfound powers due to her DNA changing after she entered Wanda's world again, and she doesn't even acknowledge them. I mean, just a little look of surprise on her face is all it would have took, but she just ignores it and acts like it's nothing. And when Kat Denning says to Vision, "I've been watching WandaVision and your connection is beautiful" and all that, I couldn't help but think, is this the character development, or is this the showrunner stroking his ego thinking that he's actually developed them beautifully? Because it's just a manipulative relationship from Wanda's side, and she's engaging in a relationship with someone who essentially has complete amnesia and has trapped him in a world where everyone is enslaved to live fake lives against their will, and she finds their relationship romantic. And again, how does she know exactly what happened to Vision in Infinity War, as Wanda wouldn't have told them about it, and all of the other Avengers were knocked out by Thanos? Yet she tells Vision his whole backstory. And I gotta say, the whole road trip that Vision and Darcy had was just terrible and corny. And the joke about Vision having the out of nowhere interviews, they should have no effect on him because he is actively going against the rules of the sitcom world and is thinking for himself now. So this just feels like more forced comedy. And by the way, I couldn't help but think throughout this whole road trip, Vision can fly. What are they wasting time waiting in traffic for? You guessed it, so Vision and Kat Dennings can have a road trip comedy, and it's not even that funny, and it just pads the whole episode out. Should we really be doing this when we have 2 episodes left to go until this show is over? And when Wanda gets inside Agnes's house, that's where the episode actually started to have that creepy tone that I wanted it to have, that the trailers had advertised, and the aspect ratio changed, the music was creepily atmospheric, and when this happened, I wanted to get up and cheer. This is what I wanted to get earlier and what the advertising had shown us. But in the actual episodes, they kept playing goofy music with the other scary scenes, but this actually became creepy, and I loved every second of it. And then we get the reveal. The comedic reveal. And do you remember what I said about Marvel a couple minutes ago? This just proves my point that when Marvel are doing something that is suspenseful or serious, they get nervous and think, let's pull back into our safe space, comedy. No, this is too serious and scary for you. Don't worry, here are some jokes instead. Yep, that's exactly what they did with this ending. It was beautifully set up with this creepy atmosphere, and rather than commit to it, they just keep going back to their safe space. Comedy. Also, what did Agatha even do all along? Because aside from showing us a couple of mischievous pranks and brainwashing a guy that Wanda had already brainwashed, all of this is still Wanda, and she is the one that is responsible for controlling all of these people. And aside from killing a puppy, Agatha hasn't done anything that I would consider evil or worse than what Wanda has done. So what exactly is being revealed here? And this really makes her reveal lack a serious weight. And to go from the wonderfully creepy tone to the corny flashbacks and song of Agatha all along, that was bloody embarrassing, and I was shocked when I saw them do this. And the show seems to think that this is a big reveal that it was Agatha all along, but really it wasn't. Because everyone's first guess as to who the villain was in this show was Agnes, so everyone knew that it was Agatha all along. The whole thing felt like an exaggerated reveal because we all saw it coming, and she hasn't done anything aside from a couple of pranks. So this reveal falls flat on its face, and it's one of the worst twist/reveals I have ever seen. Seriously, that ending, I actually thought to myself that I would be embarrassed to be watching this in front of my parents. They've watched all of the MCU stuff and they've stuck with it, but this, they would get the old sitcom references, but they'd still be thinking, what the hell did I just watch? And again, this episode felt like it was just more build-up, and that makes 3 episodes of build-up, and I bloody well hope that next week's episode gives us more stuff rather than just more build-up. Actually, that's wrong, I take that back. We are starting to get payoff in this episode, but it was only done at the last minute and was so poorly delivered and built up that it doesn't even feel like payoff. And aside from the scene where Vision snaps Darcy out of her trance and the creepy scene where Wanda searches through Agatha's house, I didn't like anything else about this episode, and the reality TV presentation that they gave this episode was truly awful. And then they abandoned everything with the tone they set up to do this cheesy, out-of-nowhere thing. So this episode gets a 5 out of 10. I am very disappointed. This is like the first actual legitimately bad episode of the show, and you would expect better at this point, especially when this is supposed to be the big reveal that the plot has been leading to, and we are nearing our final 2 episodes. I would actually say that this is the worst episode of the entire season. 2 minutes of plot and 24 minutes of filler, and this late into the show. I expected better, and that's why it's the worst. This episode really had a huge negative impact on me, and it had a bigger negative impact on my brothers. They actually hated it more than I did. I hope the next episode is better, but I don't know. I did hear that the last 2 episodes of the show will not have any more comedy sitcom gimmicks, and I bloody well hope so. Because when the show isn't being a silly sitcom, I think it's at its best. When it is a silly sitcom, it just screws up the tone when things actually start to happen in Wanda's world, and as a direct result, my immersion into the story is broken, and when the next episode releases, I just don't feel like watching the episode right away because I know that I have to keep sitting through more of the comedy sitcom gimmick. So yeah, here's hoping the next episode will be better, but I was really unimpressed with this episode, and it has actually made me lose interest in the rest of the show. And for those of you that have been recommending it to me since I've been talking about the inconsistent tone of WandaVision, yes, I am finally watching Doom Patrol as a lot of you have requested. And the show is shockingly similar to WandaVision with some of its themes, so I know why you were recommending it, particularly when the main villain breaks the 4th wall and narrates over the heroes. And yeah, you guys were right, the tone in Doom Patrol is handled so much better. The humor is there, but when things get creepy, the music changes, and the more intense scenes are not interrupted with goofy humor. Now the show itself is good so far, but not great, but it's the tone that I am really talking about here, and it is leaps and bounds better and more competently handled than the overly goofy tone in WandaVision. I don't know what to say. For once, without the Russo brothers, Marvel have made something that does not have stupid, untimely humor that ruins it. There was genuine emotion in this episode, and it was treating a subject matter with a lot of maturity and respect, and it told a story seriously. This is what I have been asking for all this time from the MCU, and as a result, that made this episode more investing and more emotional. Even when Wanda saw Vision's dismantled body and touched his head and said,
I can't feel you.
"This is really freaking emotional. Where the hell was this before?" This is the kind of stuff I know that Marvel is capable of, and usually they would interrupt emotional moments like this with a joke, but here they didn't. This is what I want to see more of, consistency with tone, and I don't want them to just interrupt scenes like this from playing out. This scene also shows us that this guy was lying. Wanda didn't break in and take Vision's body. She left and created her own Vision, so I wonder why he lied and what else he is plotting and why he really wants to kill Wanda to the point that he is lying to people that Wanda broke in and attacked everyone. We will have to wait and find out. And this episode does explain why Wanda is so much into sitcoms with this world that she created, and it was about what I expected. And after seeing the reason why we are in the sitcom world, this is where a well-written show will make you want to go back and watch the show again and see it with a more educated set of eyes. But unlike movies that do this well, I have no desire to do that with WandaVision because they dragged the episodes out for too long. Now, the only problems I have with this episode is that A, I still don't care about the kids, and B, watching those previous 7 episodes feels like a complete waste of time, because emotionally, they didn't make me any more sad or add any extra investment to this episode. They might as well have given us a flashback of the scene in Infinity War where Wanda sees Vision die, the part where she talks to Hawkeye at Stark's funeral in Endgame, and then cut straight to this episode, and you'll best understand what she's going through, and you'll truly see her journey continue from Endgame. As is, the direction they went by just throwing us into the sitcom stuff for 7 episodes ultimately didn't do anything to make you feel more sorry for Wanda in this moment. And that is a big problem for this show as a whole, as it feels like we got a bunch of build-up, but it didn't make the payoff any better. So the build-up just feels like a failed experiment. And that's exactly what this whole comedy sitcom mystery they threw us in was, an experiment. And I think they could have done it much better. And the thing is, the sitcoms that overstay their welcome, you don't even need them to understand the emotional state that Wanda is in when she sees Vision's dead body. When I saw this scene, I had all the emotions that the scene wanted me to have, and none of that was amplified because of the previous sitcom episodes we saw the two in. The sitcoms really lacked any emotional purpose because they are supposed to make a scene like this even more sad and emotional, but they just didn't. They had absolutely no effect on these fantastic emotional scenes. My brother even said that he thought the show would be more effective if it started out with this episode, and although I don't fully agree, I do see where he is coming from. It would have done less meandering and it would have started the show off with a very strong emotional hook. But yeah, I really am at a loss for words. Everything in this episode was great, and this was the least comedic episode, and honestly, it greatly benefited from it. All of the other WandaVision episodes have been good, bad, and okay, but none of them have been truly great. But this is the first episode that is fantastic. The only thing that I can say, which is kind of negative, but not really, is that this episode is doing nothing new. All TV shows have done this. The episode where the hero is going through their previous memories, and the villain shows up and comments on their lives every now and then. Smallville did several versions of this, the best one being when Clark has to go inside of Lex's mind where he confronts a strong, evil Lex Luthor, and the remaining super weak, good Lex Luthor. And symbolically, evil Lex Luthor is killing what little is left of good Lex Luthor. That was an amazing episode, and honestly, one of my favorites as to when we go inside of a character's head and revisit segments of their past. The Flash also did this. Arrow did it as well at some point, and I have seen plenty of other shows that have done this as well. This is something that TV shows always do, and WandaVision has taken a spin at it, and it was a lot of fun to watch. I don't really have much else to say. This was a beautiful episode, and the best episode of the entire season by far. We should have gotten it much sooner, and I'm giving it a 9 out of 10. This episode just proves it to me that Marvel really need to pack it in with the forced goofy humor, use it where it's needed, and then leave it. Don't overdo it. And we got a credit scene that was not crap like it was in the last episode. And immediately, I got 2 things out of it. One is that Vision is brought back to life for a short period, and 2, which is most likely, is that he is a lifeless shell that S.W.O.R.D. is going to use to fight Wanda. And Wanda, knowing that this is Vision's body, will be very reluctant to fight him. Oh boy, are we gonna be here for a while. Just when the last episode blew me away, I thought that the show was being put on the right track. And well, as you can tell by the tone of my voice, Now I'll just say that there was some good things in this episode. First off, the best fight of the episode was Vision versus Vision. They did some cool stuff where the two were both simultaneously using their powers, and I like how they both talk to each other intelligently and choose that the best course of action is to stop fighting. And in the end, fake Vision gives Vision his memory back and he flies away, so the real Vision is still alive in the end, because like I said, the MCU keep bringing their characters back to life, and they can't keep them dead. Death means nothing in the MCU. And the fight at the end, although I enjoyed the Vision fight, it just felt like a lame and predictable comic book movie ending. The ending is very much the same as what we got in Dark Phoenix, and not only did it remind me of Dark Phoenix, but it also reminded me of Man of Steel and Batman v Superman.
It is that evolution always wins.
My programming directive is to destroy Vision. Most of these results are peaceful.
Did you guys notice that, or was it just me? And the so-called big battle with Wanda and Agatha in the end, I think even calling it a battle is giving it far more credit than it deserves, because there really was no battle. Wanda uses her powers and Agatha absorbs them, and for some reason Agatha stops fighting and keeps monologuing and trying to convince Wanda to give up her powers. And this just confused me. Why are you convincing her to give you her powers when all you have to do is attack Wanda like you have been doing, have her defend herself, and then just absorb the rest of her powers? But just completely stopping the fight to convince her to give you her powers, it was just so stupid. Really it was. And it honestly made their battle come off as very silly, and I couldn't take it seriously. I mean, The Incredibles made fun of the monologuing villain, and this show actually does what that movie was making fun of and expects you to take it seriously.
So why don't you surrender your magic? What do you say?
And now I have a weapon that only I can defeat. And when I unleash it, I'll get... You sly dog! You got me monologuing! I can't believe it.
It also did the superhero landing that Deadpool made fun of, where Wanda, despite being nearly choked to death, dropped to her feet like a superhero supermodel. I mean really, I have never seen the superhero landing look that clean and polished before. And when she finally takes out the big villain of the show, it happened way too quickly, and seeing her get defeated didn't feel satisfying in the slightest. I mean, these are two witches. Remember what Wanda did in Infinity War and Endgame, how fast and unforgiving her fighting style was and how she would pick up huge objects. In comparison, this is just embarrassingly uncreative and uninspired, and it's not helped by the fact that Agatha absorbing Wanda's powers reminds me of the exact same scene in Dark Phoenix where the alien is absorbing Jean's powers, and it also reminds me of the scene in the 2003 Hulk movie where in that confusing final battle, Banner's father is absorbing the Hulk's powers. They took the end scene of two bad comic book movies and used that as the finale between Wanda and the villain in her own show, and it worked a tiny bit better than those two, but barely. It was just unimpressive and one of the worst final battles in the MCU, and it was by far the worst parts of this episode, and it should have been one of the best. Also, Wanda uses this ability of hers, and it was a good move, but it pissed me off that she used it because it begs the question, why didn't she use it on Thanos in Infinity War? And how did this nightmare turn on Wanda? And when it does, all of a sudden, she's weak and lets the dead people take her. She should have at least attempted to use her powers and fight them off, but she doesn't. Until much later, that is, when it becomes more dramatic to do so. And what's with the two poorly done Incredibles shots? This shot looks so silly, and I asked my brothers what they thought of this image as it was the final episode's thumbnail on Disney Plus, and the first word that came out of their mouths was also the word silly. And yeah, it was silly. It wasn't epic and awesome looking like how The Incredibles executed it. And then when Wanda uses a force field to protect her family, again, it looked like a less impressive version of another incredible shot with the family. And on a side note, who else thought that her son looked like he was dressed up as Ben 10? Also, this final episode still shows us that it wasn't Agatha all along. It was still Wanda. Agatha even tells Wanda that it was all her own doing.
What are you doing to her?
You're making her say this.
She's your meat puppet, I just cut her strings.
Making this exaggerated reveal make even less sense. I think that Agatha is such a bullshit villain. All the credit for this character goes to the actress doing a really great and entertaining job at giving this character some personality, but the way the villain just plays pranks and is somehow credited as the main villain who was behind this all along just doesn't come across and makes no sense, and she gets taken out so quickly. I gotta say, she really is one of the most non-threatening MCU villains, and this whole episode plays out and ends in a way where the other characters such as Wu, Darcy and Monica Rambeau all feel completely useless and irrelevant to what goes on in the rest of the episode. Even when Agent Jackass here gets arrested, it also feels underwhelming, and you didn't need Darcy to stop him. The kids easily could have done it with their own powers. Wu also talks to Clint over the phone, presumably Hawkeye, and he doesn't show up in the episode, but we'll most likely see him answer the phone on his end in his own Hawkeye show. And how can no one here see Wu grabbing the phone? That's just incompetent direction. I mean, this guy is right behind him. And Monica Rambeau, I never really liked her on this show. She started out fine, but as the show went on, I really started to lose interest in her. And I think I know why. Her performance comes off like she is on a show from the CW. Everyone else is acting like they are in a movie, and she just comes off as one of the side characters that you would get in a CW DC TV show. Not when they were good, but the bad ones. And that's why I'm not that impressed with this character. She seems too far removed from what everyone else is doing, and acting wise, she feels like she is very much one note, especially in the final scenes of episode 7. What also annoyed me is that Wanda didn't have to face any consequences for her downright villainous actions. Throughout the show, we are told that these people are in agony, and in this episode, we also have this lady who begs Wanda to let her daughter out of her room.
I have a daughter. She's 8. If you could just let her out of her room. If I could just hold her.
And in the end, after they're all free from their prison, they all give Wanda dirty looks. And then Monica Rambeau said something that really pissed me off.
They'll never know what you sacrificed for them.
What?
You stupid bitch.
Even if they did know, who gives a shit? She kept them hostage and was not letting them go, and the state they were in is described as a fate worse than death. And you're saying that these people have no idea what she sacrificed for them? The absolute nerve! She might as well go up to Thanos after he killed Gamora and snapped his fingers in Infinity War and say to him,
"They'll never know what you sacrificed for them."
I just found this to be a stupid line, and it made me dislike Monica Rambeau's character even more than I already did. And Wanda, as I said, didn't even face any ramifications for the crimes that she committed. It's just a convenient ending that you would expect from an MCU film, all wrapped up neatly with a bow. Also, in my review for the last episode, I said that Agent Douche here was lying about Wanda breaking in and stealing Vision, and aside from being a generic douchebag agent, what was the reason for him lying to everyone? They made it out like he had a secret prejudice against Wanda or something, and that's why he lied. But in the end, that lie doesn't come back, it's just completely ignored. So he lied for no reason. This was a completely pointless cover-up. He could just as easily have told everyone that Wanda has kept people hostage in this little bubble of hers and that we need to take her out to free everyone. That excuse to kill her would have passed. What was the point of framing it like she broke in and tried to steal Vision? This part of the show really made no sense, and because this show did a horrible job at making him villainous, they just go for the lazy route and just make him cartoonishly evil to the point that he would even shoot a couple of kids. And they do this just so you can hate him and think that he's worse than Wanda. That is so lazy, even for the MCU. And yeah, that resolution with Evan Peters. Let's talk about that. Now, Kevin Feige said that WandaVision is the first of a 3-part multiverse story, and with a live-action Spider-Verse movie being made with Spider-Man 3, it was more than fair for us to assume that Kevin Feige was bringing in some of the X-Men with the multiverse in WandaVision, especially with the casting of Evan Peters as Quicksilver. He could potentially have been pulled into this world via the multiverse. There are just so much huge possibilities with this ingenious reveal, but in the end, he was just a nobody. It turns out that he was just some random guy, which makes the casting of Evan Peters even more misleading and honestly trollish, because they knew that we were gonna think that this was their way of bringing in the X-Men via the multiverse, and it turned out to all be bullshit in the end. I mean, why would you tease something so huge and awesome and then just subvert our expectation with a boner joke? Are we supposed to be impressed by that? It's another example of the MCU doing something that starts out cool and then just turns it into a joke. And I question why they even bothered to cast Evan Peters in the first place, with the exception exception of just tricking people into watching and talking about the show. Speaking of tricking people into watching the show, Kevin Feige said that we need to see WandaVision in order to understand the 3-part story of Spider-Man 3 and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, as all 3 films are supposed to be connected. But then 1 week before the finale, when we had 1 episode to go before the show concluded, he suddenly said, well, you don't need to see WandaVision in order to understand Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. We're making it so that if you haven't seen WandaVision, you'll still understand what's going on. So Kevin Feige essentially tricked us into watching the show, and then after we had all seen the previous 8 and we had 1 episode left, he told us the truth that, well, you don't need to see the show to understand the future movies, which is very frustrating. Just like when Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness was announced as a full-on horror movie, and then he said that it's just going to be a normal Marvel movie with a couple of horror scenes in it. And if they are anything like the so-called horror scenes in WandaVision, then they really aren't going to be anything noteworthy, even with Sam Raimi at the helm, as they can easily tell him to not make the scenes that scary. And by the way, again, the Clone Wars animated show had horror and suspense in several of their episodes, and they were far more frightening, scary, and disturbing than anything in WandaVision. Again, it's another example of the MCU being too family-friendly to the point that a family-friendly animated series on Cartoon Network is actually outdoing them with regards to mature storytelling. And the Clone Wars tells funnier jokes. We were also told that the show would have a Mandalorian Season 2 level cameo by the end, but that never happened. Again, another lie. The false marketing really is another thing that hurt this show. If you don't have anything, then don't lie and insinuate that you do. But I feel this show is more style and hype over substance. And then we are given 2 end credit scenes that I don't give 2 shits about after being so disappointed by this main story. I genuinely do feel that if Marvel don't have the Russo brothers, then they don't know what to do with building up their grand story. The Winter Soldier, Civil War, and Infinity War, these are movies that were so great on their own merits, and they built up to the grand story, Endgame. But WandaVision has not made a show that is great on its own merits, and all it essentially did was lightly hint towards future movies in the end. Emotionally, the show also peaked with this scene in episode 8, and nothing else was going to be as good as that, because that was the real Vision. This, although is a likable fake Vision, is still a fake Vision, an imaginary friend, and this scene was not going to have an emotional impact anywhere near as good as the scene in episode 8. So yeah, this was a passable episode, but as the finale to this show, it was underwhelming and disappointing as all heck, and it gets an unenthusiastic 6 out of 10. And the show as a whole gets an average 5 out of 10. This show would have been much better as a binge watch, because waiting for each episode to come out just felt like it was delivering disappointment after disappointment. And after having watched the whole season now, I can say that it didn't need to be 9 episodes long. It could have cut the fat and told its entire story in 3 hours. This whole show honestly feels like a troll, and I don't think the writing was smart enough to fully realize the potential of this concept. And I'm just gonna say it, I think the show is overrated as heck. The show needs to be good on its own merits, and I feel like most of the value of this show comes from what it is setting up next, and that makes this show just one big advertising campaign, rather than something that stands on its own. And when I finished watching the final episode, I was like, oh, the show is over. Okay, I guess. I didn't feel like, wow, that was so awesome. Shows that have given me that wow factor was the finale to The Flash's season 1 and 2, but especially season 1, the season finales to Sherlock series 2 and 3, as well as the series finale to Avatar The Last Airbender season 2 and 3, and several of the Clone Wars seasons, especially that series finale. Those shows left me with a wow factor, but WandaVision left me with nothing really, and that's because it feels like they spent more time meandering with the comedy sitcom stuff and only spent 2 episodes giving us the actual story, and whereas episode 8 did a terrific job, episode 9 was just a lackluster conclusion to a lackluster show. A show that was acting like it had so much cool stuff up its sleeve, but in the end, it gave us a boner joke to one of the biggest questions in the season finale.
Boner.
And that honestly feels like an insult. Now who else wants to see the MCU bring in Hugh Jackman as Wolverine? So, that's it for my Let's Binge Watch of WandaVision. If you want me to do this with the Falcon and the Winter Soldier show, then be sure to let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up as it really does help, and feel free to donate to me via Patreon. Even if you donate just $1, it really goes a long way in supporting the channel. Thanks as always for watching guys, I really do appreciate it, and I will see all of you very soon. Take care.